James at 16 will not be presented this evening, but will return next week at its regular time. Stay tuned now for a special 2-hour What Really Happened to the Class of 65.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
If you like comic books, then you definitely like comic art. Visit comicartfans.com to see original comic artworks and custom drawings that people have collected and posted online. Coming soon, Comic Art Fans is hosting an in-person event called the Original Art Expo that will focus on the hobby of collecting original comic art. The Original Art Expo will be held at the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel in Orlando, Florida on January 26th through the 28th, 2024. They will have over 30 exhibitors and 60 comic artists. Spend the weekend in an intimate setting with some of the best creators in the world. Purchase or commission a piece of original comic art. Visit the Comic Art and Illustration Galleries. Attend the Saturday night auction and pizza party and hang out with your fellow comic art enthusiasts. The Original Art Expo is sure to be the world's premier visual storytelling art event, so don't miss out. Go to oa-expo.com to get your tickets today and visit comicartfans.com to see what comic art collecting is all about.
Hi, I'm Alex Ross.
The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Such here. Always happy to welcome another Midwesterner, Dan Jurgens, to Word Balloon. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you again, John.
Absolutely, man. We had a commercial that started the show for OAX. You're going to be there next weekend, correct?
Yeah, it starts 1 week from tomorrow. Really looking forward to it. I think it's a very interesting exercise that's a little bit overdue in the United States, kind of a European appreciation of art, style of effort, and it's great to see it come.
Yeah, it really is more of an art show than a comic convention, per se.
Right, very, very much so. And again, I think the sensibilities with it are very European in general. I think Bill Cox has put together a very nice program, a very good opening event with a lot of good talent there. And then the idea that it really is much more about the art than it is, say, about even specifically comic books in general or specific characters in general. It's about comic art. And again, I really think that's something that is overdue here in America.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And, Bill and I have worked together for a couple of years now. We started working together during COVID and doing some of his online shows. And I know you've been a part of those in the past as well. No, he's got a great group of people and truly everybody. Obviously, this is a sponsor of Word Balloon, but I'm glad they bought the time. And frankly, I think it's going to be a great show.
Yeah, I do too. And I think there are a couple of things that are wrapped up in it. And for example, one of the discussion points we've been hearing a lot about over the past several years, or maybe even more, is that in terms of creative appreciation, the recognition of writers has, I think, fair to say, become more dominant over the past several years. Whereas for me, I think it used to be built more around artists. And so I do think that this is a good exercise as something that can exist for artists, kind of bring artists to the fore. Obviously, since I do both, I hold no judgment. I think it all works out. There's room for everybody. But I do think it's a good idea to kind of bring that level of recognition back to artists and what they do in this business. And this is a great starting event.
Absolutely, man. No, I'm really looking forward to hearing how it goes. And again, Bill and Kazra behind OAX have been great guys to me. And again, I really hope this is the start of many more. And I know alongside traditional comic conventions, there are CAFs, comic art festivals. This is kind of leaning towards that. But again, I think this is going to be something unique. And I look forward to hearing the word from it and everything. So
yeah, I do too. And certainly from the minute it was announced, and at least as I was announced as a guest, I know I started hearing from people in terms of art fans and people who are looking for that specific sort of exercise where they can go know that plenty of art dealers are going to be there. It'll be a point where they can kind of buy their own artwork. I think it's even possible where we're going to see some collectors set up on their own to sell some of their artwork so they get more money to buy artwork. And I think it's going to be just that nice sort of art exchange environment. It's also built around the idea of it being a very social event in that, as you know, conventions can be so active. It can be hard just to squeeze in conversations sometimes. This will be more relaxed. It will give everybody a chance just to talk and chat. They can talk about, what they've done, what they have coming up, and even process a little bit. Because I know for me, when I sit down with 4 or 5 other artists, it's always fun to talk a little bit of process. How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you not make that mistake? And so I look forward to a little bit of that as well. And I think people will walk away very pleased with what they experience here.
That's great, man. No, I'm looking forward to it. When you were starting out, Dan, who were some of those older artists that were mentors to you and kind of helped you figure out how to do things?
Well, I think the first and most obvious one is probably Mike Grell, just because my first work was on Warlord, which Mike had created, written and drawn for a number of years. He was still writing the book. And so as I came on as a brand new artist, he was someone I could talk to a little bit about just how it might work in terms of breaking down a script, about how to move things along, stay on deadline, all of that kind of thing. But then another realistic part of that was that my first editor on the book was a woman by the name of Sutton, who was probably like 4 or 5 issues in, replaced by Ross Andrew. Ross had been a long time in this business, both for Marvel and DC. So once Ross was the editor, we could have more discussions again about cover design, page design, and get more granular about the nuts and bolts of putting together a comic book in a visual sense. And that was really good. And, Ross could get reserved at times, and other times it would just kind of come out and he'd be a little more willing to really get into it a little bit and work with me in terms of what are the expectations of an artist? What is the expectation of the writer here in terms of what you're going to deliver on the story? And so that was good. And the other one was, very early, Dick Giordano was at that time managing editor of DC. And so he'd also have plenty of encouragement, plenty of words of advice, plenty of corrective sort of comments. I'll never forget one day when Dick called me up and he was inking a Batman story I had drawn. And he said, and at that point, I was still fairly new. So my figure drawings were probably somewhat closer to real life in terms of proportion. And Dick said, just so you know, I'm inking all your heads on the inside of the head rather than following the line directly. So we're really talking about a very minimal change. But for him, it was by making the head just a little bit smaller, you make the figure look a little bit larger. And it was good to hear. And then he could just say, so in the future, as you pencil, since that's what I'm doing, why don't you just adjust it so that I don't have to? And that was great. And that's the kind of thing you aren't going to hear from anybody else who's editing you. So it's all valuable.
Have you ever led any of these art chalk talks that I know DC will have on occasion?
We've talked about it several times, but we have never gotten to the point where we're actually able to put it together.
And who have you helped out along the way and mentored, passing it along?
Well, I've worked with a lot of young talent over time. Some are very willing to engage and listen. Other ones, not so much. And so I think that's always best to ask the person in question what they've gotten out of it. I know that there was, one time, for example, I was at a convention in New York, and someone stopped and showed me their stuff, and I immediately said, "This is so good. We got to find something for you to do." And we got this individual at Teen Titans Annual to draw on the spot. I just said, "Look, let's create a project. I'll write it. He can draw it."
Wow.
That was John Cassaday. And
that's great.
Yeah,
sure.
And there was no help I could give him. I mean, John was there. His stuff was fantastic, and just absolutely ready to go. And if he got anything out of me, it was by osmosis, because there wasn't much I could tell him.
That's got to be thrilling, though, to see someone new that already understands what they're doing. And and I've had the pleasure, although he doesn't draw as much as he did back when he was getting started. But I remember a Baltimore con where Walt Simonson came over, and I was sitting with Bendis, and Walt was showing his pages of John Paul Leon. I want to say it was a vigilante thing they were doing together. But he was so excited about, and John was already established, but he was just so excited about sharing, like, look what John's doing, look at this, look at that. And it was great. And it was really great to see, a veteran like Walt be so excited about, stuff that, new stuff and everything. So that's it's cool.
Well, it's one of the reasons that you can get excited by that is it's usually somebody who brings something a little bit different to it that maybe you were trying to reach yourself, but hadn't quite gotten to, or was in the back of your mind of trying to push something in that direction. And so both those guys would, John Paul Leon and John Cassaday would have, I think, fit into that sort of description that I'm talking about, where, they've got so much going on their own at an early time that, again, it's just like, there's not much to say. You say, here's the story, take it and run, and let's see where you're going to take this. Let's see where you go, which I think is cool. And, on that one time, very early, I'd done a cover. Again, it was a Warlord cover, and Len Wein was kind of functioning as cover editor at that time. And Len sent me a note, and it just said, "That was great. Do more of this." But I didn't know what this was. So I actually called him up. I said, "Well, Len, what are you referring to with the more of this?" And he laughed, and he was talking about some of the lighting sensibility that I had put into the cover. But again, that's where that sort of feedback, I think, is important. And it's important at a young age, so that when you can find someone where that's all you have to say is do more, follow your instincts, follow your heart, follow your style in that way, it can really turn out nice.
That's great. I certainly hope aspiring artists have an opportunity to go to Orlando and check out this OAX show. And learn from you, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. I know one of the Kuberts are down there. I think it's Adam. I'm not sure if it's Adam or Andy.
Yep.
And man. Oh, God, Sean Gordon Murphy, Matt Wagner and Kelly Jones. It's Bob Layton. So many great people. And I think Amanda and Jimmy are going to be there.
Well, yeah.
So,
and it also, if you start to look at all those names, it's a group of people with very long and different backgrounds in the business. And, even someone like you mentioned Bob Layton. Well, Bob has been an anchor. He's been a writer. He's worked in editorial. I mean, he has done so much that with that number of varied backgrounds, or even Adam, if you think about him as a teacher, and all that experience and that idea of that wealth of ideas that is there. I think there's just, from open conversation, plenty anyone could get out of it.
That's great, man. Very cool. Some words from the chat. A lot of people are saying hello. Ronnie and Rascal, thank you very much. It's I've been on a very lucky streak talking to people like Dan. Really, even before Christmas, I've been very fortunate every week having a great artist or writer on to talk. We were Tom King and I were talking last night, Dan, and he said hello. So absolutely. And Il Nova, this is great. Now, this is why I love when I do an afternoon chat from Italy. Evening time.
Here we go.
So he just wanted to do, or she, pardon me, Ilona. I don't know if Il Nova, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but just reread Reign of Superman. And my CK21, love Dan's work. Death of Superman was the first trade I was gifted as a kid. Wow.
That's a good gift.
Dan, as I think of Death and Reign of the Superman, were one of the 4 designs or ideas for a character your specific contribution to the story?
Cyborg Superman, and as we started to get to this idea of, instead of just having Superman come back, of doing the 4 different characters who looked or claimed to be Superman, one of the things we keyed on right away is they would all be very different. And that's when I said, let's do one as a villain. And then I started to think about how that would work with Cyborg Superman, which was in terms of earlier known as Hank Henshaw, a character I had introduced earlier, that I think that gave us a little more drama to the story. It gave us a big reveal because first he looked like he might be the real Superman, somehow reincarnated. So when you can then pull the rug out from under the readers that way and have them see, oh, story is a little deeper than we thought, I think that's part of what makes it magic. So yeah, that's the one that was mine.
And later on, was it Mongol and the Cyborg Superman that destroyed Star City?
Yes.
Or Coast City?
Coast City.
Yes. Star City, Green Arrow, Coast City, Green Lantern. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And were you writing that, or did you was there something in editorial like, hey, everybody in Green Lantern, how did that those two?
So as we were planning that entire return of segment of the story, in order to really raise the stakes, I had said, we have all these fictional cities in the DC universe. Now, to take just a slight step back from that, when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths, all the fictional cities went away except Metropolis and Gotham City. And the initial mandate was none of those fictional cities are ever coming back.
Wow.
So ultimately they did, of course. But so even as we were working on that particular story, I said, with these fictional cities, we always hold back. We never just take one off the map. Let's do that. Let's kind of raise the stakes here, show how evil these characters could be in terms of what they're after, in terms of what their goals are. My first suggestion was actually Central City. And the thought was, well, maybe we can use that for a big Flash thing. And the Flash guys at the time said, no, we don't really want to do that. So then we shifted to Coast City. And obviously that's what then became this big impetus for Green Lantern, then became Parallax and everything else through the Emerald Twilight storyline.
Yes.
Yeah. So to me, that's good storytelling where one thing leads to another, and just keeps it all rolling, which is kind of where we were at in those days.
Absolutely, man. And you're right. And I think that sometimes is the complaint about events, that the reset button sometimes happens right after the event and you really don't see fallout consequences. Sometimes you do, and certainly a lot of times with events, they begat new titles and new ideas for things. I mean, you guys just went through that with the Lazarus event that just happened, and so many, different reasons for new iterations of Doom Patrol and the like, yeah.
Right,
so.
Right. Well, and even, so not long after that, I did Zero Hour. And part of Zero Hour was to launch several new books, several new titles, one of which was an absolute grand slam, and that was Starman. And, and if you get something that then lasts for a number of years, that becomes, another part of these really needed building blocks that support our superhero universe or whatever it might be, that's a win across the board at that point. And that's what you try and get, as well as a universe that holds together for a while. And so you're not doing one every 6 months, but once every 10 years.
Understood, man. I'll still never. Well, that's not true. Of course, I forgive you. I'm being hyperbolic. But man, when you aged the Justice Society, I was like, oh man, it's like all those guys suddenly, were their age again, and it's like, oh, that's heartbreaking, man.
Well, here was the problem, and so at that time we were seeing, if you remember, going into that, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan had gray at the temples.
Yes, he did,
and was aging noticeably, as were other characters. With Oliver Queen, we were seeing his birthdays in the book every year. We saw him turn, I think, 43, 44, 45, and they'd say, it's his 44th birthday today. Yet the Justice Society was not getting any older. So we realized we were setting up this problem where the Justice League characters were getting to be older than the Justice Society.
Yeah, they're going to bump against them, sure.
Yep. So I said, we can go one of two ways here. We can recreate Earth 2 and have all these Justice Society characters on Earth 2 where they do not age, or they have to age in accordance with where your main heroes in the DCU are right now, which we were also going to try and sneakily roll back a little bit. That was the option DC chose. I myself would have gone with Earth 2, but again, that all goes back to Crisis and part of what was decided coming out of that, which was, no parallel universes, no other Earths, no fictional cities except Metropolis and Gotham, no time travel. There were a lot of kind of rules that came out of that, some of which were good, others that are harder to stick to.
As an old-time DC reader, I've always appreciated the multiverse. And the level of event, starting with Gardner Fox and for decades, Len Wein being one of those writers, yourself, it was exciting when the parallel worlds would cross and get the various teams would get together. And I don't know about you, Dan, I'm only speaking for myself, but as much as I love parallel universes, what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done with them, I'm like, it's like me with zombies. Enough, my God, do something cool, but to just say, hey, look, they're all here. And it's like, because the one thing I liked about the second Doctor Strange movie was seeing that Illuminati with Patrick Stewart as Professor X, and Reed Richards and Captain Carter, Sharon Carter as Captain America, or Peggy Carter as Captain America. Fantastic ideas, or Captain Britain, whatever she was. But yeah, man, it's just like. And again, because they really, in the comics, it was such a novelty. But man, it's like, hey, parallel universe. What do you think? It's like, easy.
Well, there are a couple of points to that. And it's not lost on me that the multiverse, which had essentially been DC's domain, is something that Marvel has really, I think, kind of taken over, right? I think that's fair to say, in part because of the movies. Yeah. But then the other one on top of that is, just I think from a conceptual problem, I do think that people who invest their time, energy, and money into reading about characters and specific universes, by that I mean the DC universe of characters or Marvel universe, they do want some sense of structure around that. I mean, as a kid, one of the things I reacted to with Marvel was this idea that they were all on one world. There was one timeline. I understood how it all fit. And I appreciated that. I liked that. It was that structure, because once you understood the structure was cool. That's how it seemed to me. If you then get to the point where you say, everything happened, everything is real, it was all there, then to me, nothing is real, right? In a sports analogy, it's like a football team where it's described as, if you think you have two quarterbacks, that means you don't have one quarterback, which really makes a lot of sense. And I think by the same token, with that, if you're going to say everything happened, everything is real, it all counts, then in a way nothing does, because then there's no structure. And then there are also too many conflicts. And I think you start to water down that which is special about individual characters. That's just me.
Yeah, I understand. I meant to ask when we were talking about Hank Henshaw being an astronaut and all. I don't know why, Dan. Lately, I've just been on this kick of really revisiting NASA's history, and especially the Mercury through Apollo years. I mean, it's, you know, and again, for
Right.
everyone
Fascinating stuff.
well, and you know, you and I were around when the moon landing happened and stuff, and you know, for instance, I don't know if you watch For All Mankind on Apple.
Yes.
Oh my God, what a
Yeah.
show! What a show! And being an Apollo kid, and you know, I was only 4 when the moon landing happened, but my parents and grandparents were very smart and bought all the National Geographic stuff. And I talk about it all the time that my father really, like, I'm 4 years old and he points to the window and he goes, "You see the moon?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he pointed to the TV and there's Armstrong and Aldrin walking around. He goes, "That's where those guys are right now." I got it. I mean, again, 4 years old, but I'm like, that's amazing. And I think that's why I'm a Star Trek fan, because I think even as you know, futuristic as it was, I'm like, well, it's kind of plausible. I mean, we're on the moon. Who's to say 300 years from now we don't have ships traveling around the galaxy and stuff and checking out other planets and things? But you know, was creating Hank Henshaw, like, I'm always surprised there aren't more astronaut kind of books, comic books and things. I don't know if that would have ever intrigued you to write any sort of Apollo era sort of story. I mean, I know there was, you know, certainly Strange Adventures and all the Adam Strange stuff and the cosmic stuff that DC was doing, let alone Marvel. But yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts on all the astronauts?
Yeah. Well, no, I think part of it is because I'm with you 100%. If you think and go all the way back through the Apollo program, and you think of what happened with Apollo 1, with the ship burning up on the pad and 3 astronauts dying in the cabin, it's amazing they ever got to the point where they later launched something that did end up with a walk on the moon, especially by the end of the decade.
Absolutely.
It was the comeback to what had been a tragedy was remarkably fast, and they pulled it off. They actually pulled it off. But then if you look at what happened right after that, there was so much change in society. Whereas we start the 60s and the space program was like this incredible thing and this incredible goal. And then they get to the end of the 60s and they hit that goal. Man walks on the moon and it's like, okay, job done. And all of a sudden, like, the space program seemed to lose steam. Interest certainly evaporated. You know, there were later missions to the moon. No one seemed to pay any attention. And it was the idea of what was happening in society had changed. It was, we can no longer spend money on this. We have to spend money on people here on Earth, where we have people going hungry and we have starvation. And we have to end the Vietnam War. And it just became a very different sensibility right away. And I think because of that, it seemed to be that idea of a space program seemed to be one that writers probably stayed away from. And especially because it wasn't that long after that the space program really did disappear for a while, at least until the shuttle flew. So, you know, everything changed overnight.
Yeah, I hear you, man. No, you're absolutely right about that. And yeah, there certainly is enough interview footage of the man on the street going, like you said, hey, you know, stop spending money up there. We got problems down here. And, you know, they felt wasting millions on perpetuating the moon missions and stuff. And again, that's why I love For All Mankind, because it is almost this wish fulfillment of what could have been done had, ironically, the Cold War continued and that competition with the Soviets that was so necessary to beat them at something. And for people who aren't watching the Apple show, I won't spoil much, but I'll say it starts with the Russians beating us. And then therefore, we start women in the space program 10 years earlier. And there are moon bases by the Americans and the Soviets, which is amazing. And it just goes from there. And the ripple effect of how these small changes and other changes in history. I mean, the Beatles getting back together for the US Festival in the 80s,
right?
Like that, or if not that, or Live Aid, one of those big rock events of the 80s and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it really is a great show.
Yeah,
so,
and as you pointed out, I think the first 2 years are especially good. The first 2 seasons, and a lot of it is because, as you pointed out, it starts from realism, right? And then it goes along with sort of dovetails with what was our history along with that, but it starts to build in its little diversionary courses, and it's elements where it says, we made a change because the space program existed. These relationships changed, and when I say that, I mean the relationships among countries changed, and you just kind of go along for the ride. We're very ambitious idea.
I completely agree, and I'll be honest. I've loved all 4 seasons, and season 4 just wrapped up. I don't know if you're caught up, but
Yep.
man, another great one. And now we got to wait a year and a half for however long for season 5, but it only gets more interesting. I want to acknowledge the chat with some people checking in. Let's see here. Atomic Count. Dan, thanks for the many great stories over the years. What's a more daunting task, working on a death of a beloved character or tweaking their origins?
I think it depends on the character in the specific example. The idea is to always stay true to the character. So to me, even if you tweak a character's origin, you want to, I think, stay true to the character, be very aware of the reason that you're making the changes to the origin. It should not be gratuitous or just because you want to put your own stamp on it. It should be for a very logical reason, because something perhaps from the original origin no longer works for the character, whatever that might be. But still, the sensibility to me around the character should stay the same. And I say that because it's usually very early in a character's run-in appearance where we see that which makes that character truly different. There are exceptions to every rule, and it's not always like that. But when you think about it, even if we were reading the first few issues of Spider-Man from Amazing Fantasy on into his own series, right away we saw why he was different. So you build around that, and I think almost every character tends to be that way.
Don't worry, everybody. I promise you, because the title of this is about Dan and Mike Perkins doing their version of the 1939 Batman. Am I right, Dan? It's First Night. Is that the Batman First Night?
Batman, hyphenated Batman, First Night.
There you go. And as it was originally hyphenated. Absolutely,
yes.
Man. We will get into that, but I do want to acknowledge these people that are asking questions. And Scoons Comics wants to know, whatever happened to your creator-owned book, Deuce? The character design looked cool, but the book never came out.
Okay, so that was all part of the Bravura imprint that was being put out by Malibu. And in time, we kind of had this schedule where before I could get mine done, other guys started early. Steve Grant and Gil Kane had their book. Chaykin had his book. I think Walter had his out or was working on it. But along the way, Malibu was acquired by Marvel. And then, it all got tangled up with Marvel's Chapter 11 process and everything that came out. So by the time that we got to the point where I was ready to start and get mine out, the market had changed. The dynamic around Malibu Comics, which was putting it out, had changed because they had a whole new corporate ownership structure. Dollars were an issue because of the bankruptcy and everything else. So we never got to the point where we actually got it taken care of. But it all had to do with those sorts of external factors.
Do you have rights to the Deuce back, or?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Is that something maybe you might come back to at some point?
Yes, because I have a few things that I've always kept sort of in the hip pocket of, when the time is right, I'll do this. When the time is right, I'll do that. So, yeah, it's all still there.
That's good to hear, Dan, because honestly, I wonder sometimes about creators older than you that, always just, the pinnacle, as I'm sure when you broke into comics, was, God, if I could work for DC or Marvel, that's going to be great. And now it really is this. Certainly, DC and Marvel still have their place in the market, a very dominant place. But obviously, you've seen the other publishers grow. You've seen the creator-owned, initiative expand and everything. So I'm glad to hear that. And I'm thrilled for Johns and everybody over at Ghost Machine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Some new ideas. Yeah.
No, and I think with the stuff those guys are doing at Ghost Machine, Jeff and Pete and Francis Manipool and Brad Walker, and I think I'm hitting on almost everybody.
Jason
Brian Hitch, yeah. I mean,
I'm talking to next week about what he's doing over there.
I think the wealth of ideas there looks remarkable to me, and I think the time is right for them to have this sort of connective effort. And I wish them all the best in the world. I'm excited to see it myself.
Yeah, man. No, and again, it's a shame that Bravura kind of, didn't achieve what it wanted to as far as everybody getting their stuff out there. And God, Gorilla was another imprint like that. Around, a couple of years earlier, and everyone's kind of following the Image example of it's possible to do your own thing and have success with it.
Yeah.
L3 Go Monster 21. I hope I'm saying that right. Dan, did you see the Death of Superman movie when it came out? And if so, what did you think of it?
I think there have been several. So we had two different animated efforts. In a way, the Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice movie was somewhat the same thing because it involved the Death of Superman and Doomsday. So I'm going to assume that he probably means the animated effort, and please correct us if I'm wrong.
I thought so too. Go on.
Yeah. So I think certainly the second one, where they were able to break it into two different stories and say, here's the death of Superman, here's the return of Superman, and stay much more true to what we did in the comics. I think it was really a nice effort, and that it really got into, I think, the core of what we were trying to accomplish.
Were you able to consult on those movies at all, Dan?
No,
or the
no.
animated ones?
No, they just, well, and a lot of that is because Mike Carlin, who had been our editor, was kind of heading up those things anyway. So they had Mike. They didn't need us.
That's fair. No, I can appreciate that. Glenn in Monsterland. And he's like, what the hell? Dan Jurgens in the house? What a coup. Yeah, tell me about it. I was just reading his Superman Aliens in the car. Well, I hope not while you're driving, Glenn. What a prolific writer. My favorite First Class. We've never talked about the Superman Aliens crossover, Dan. Tell me about it.
So several months before the death of Superman, Mike Carlin and I, along with Mike Richardson, were off on a bit of a little expedition. Mike Richardson being the publisher owner of Dark Horse. And we did a distributors conference in Hawaii. And following that, we went to Australia for a convention in Sydney. So we had our wives, we were on this long trip. And one night we were sitting outside having dinner. And I think it was in Sydney. And we all started talking about Superman and aliens, and was there a way to do a Superman alien story? And pretty soon Mike Richardson and Mike Carlin and I were off in our own little story about how would this work, and fascinated by the idea of the chest burster coming right out from the Superman S shield, and just the what that visual image would mean right away, right? So we got into the idea, we talked about the story, we started to dream it up a little bit, but then when it came time to really pitch the story and sell it, DC Warner was all over it. The owners of, the Alien property at the time didn't feel that Superman was a big enough property to do a crossover with. So they said no. A little bit later, we do the Death Superman. The book is selling, gonzo numbers. And they said, yeah, we want to do this after all. So it kind of came about just because the three of us were sitting around one night and talking about the possibilities. And from there, within, 2 years, we were off and running on the story. We got Kevin Nolan to come in and ink it. So we had that unique flavor to the book because he was absolutely sensational. He brought a little bit more atmosphere to it, which was very, very nice and appropriate. Got Gregory Wright to do the colors. And it's still, to this day, one of my favorite projects that I was ever able to do. I just had great fun with it.
Yeah, man. No, that and the Predator DC crossover and stuff. No, yeah. I thought they were interesting because both the aliens and the Predators really represented, I think, unstoppable monsters. And it's like, all right, what happens when somebody like Superman has to face the aliens and stuff? I think that's fantastic. No, it's a great idea. All right, and I've gotten a correction on his pronunciation. It's Lego Monster 21. Excuse me, sir. You're 3 and you're 0 through me. but he said he meant the animated ones. He loved that when they were able to make us care about you all, the Superman Lois relationship in just one movie. Oh, I guess he's talking about the movies, since that was the emotional core of the story. Absolutely, man. No, and really, in the aftermath, God, just Lois feeling like she was all by herself, and then the Kents really just come through like they always did, and are like, come on, we think of you as our daughter. My God, of course, you're not alone. And even with the world mourning Superman, and then you go to the farm, and there's Jonathan and Martha, these little old couple and everything, about the loss of their son. No, touching moments. And also, good Lord, you give Jonathan the heart attack, and that's it. We're gone for a few months. And we didn't know it was only going to be a few months. In fact, my store owner, I'm like, all right, what's next? He's like, there is no next. It's over. And I'm like, and sorry, but even then, I'm like, bullshit. I'm like, come on, man. I go, it's goddamn Superman. They're going to start whatever their plans are. And I had no idea what you guys were going to do. Maybe was there ever a thought that, again, because you killed Kal-El, that, maybe you do a thing like Connor Kent, and maybe that's the new Superman, in the same way that we've seen these legacy new versions of characters now in the modern day sit alongside the originals.
Right. No, I mean, so when we decided to do the Death of story, part of it was that we said, if Superman is dead, then what? And we talked about the Kents, and we talked about Lois and the isolation that they would feel, because they can't tell the world that Superman was Clark Kent, their son or fiance. And after we spent so much time talking about that, which became our World Without Superman or Funeral for a Friend story. Only then did we go back and really start to say, okay, we'll kill Superman. Here's how it's going to happen, because we have to make a statement about Superman in the process. And when we did that, we plotted up through the end of, I think it was Superman 77. And then we did not know how we would bring him back. We didn't know when for sure. We had exhausted so much energy in getting to that point that we just said, okay, and then we'll take a break. And once the book started coming out, once word got out and people started to pay so much attention, only then did we get back together with this dictate that, okay, now we got to bring them back, and how. And in that meeting, one of the first things Mike said, being Mike Carlin, the editor, Mike said, the whole world is watching, so we got to make this really good. So, the pressure was on at that point. But seriously, we had written and drawn the Death of stuff. The Superman 75 was out, and before we even ever had a conversation about when and how do we think about bringing him back. So no, it wasn't all planned. We just knew we had to get through that story, and none of us were going to be able to get fill-ins. Everybody had to follow through with their end and then collapse.
Hilarious. We blew it last summer, and I say we, meaning myself and Mitch Halleck. We should have had a panel last summer at Terrificon with you and Louise, really getting granular on Louise Simonson, everybody, about the Death of Superman and what you guys did afterwards, and your collaborations with everybody else, both art and story, and Mike Carlin. I mean, I really think that was a special moment that, really exceeded expectations.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the other part of it is, for me, I give Louise all the credit for the fact that we ended up doing 4 different Supermen, because each kind of creative team on the individual books kind of had a different idea of how to bring Superman back. I had one, I think Louise and John Bogdanoff had one on Man of Steel. You had Carl Kiesel just coming in to write Adventures. You still had Roger on action, and everybody had their own thought or idea. And I remember in that meeting where, Wheezy is sitting there and she just kind of goes, oh, if only we could all do our own thing. Just kind of that sort of comment, which was very Louise. And out of that, and there was more context around that, but I still remember her saying something to that effect. And then we just said, yeah, that would be nice. How would that work? And we started to talk about it. Usually when a comment like that is made, we start to talk about it and it doesn't work. And we kind of come back and say, okay, now what do we got? What else? And you move on. But that was something that took. And I think she had given it a little bit more thought to even having a way, well, maybe we can do this. And, some of that could even have been that editorial background that she had, but it ended up being the right answer because no one saw it coming. And it just took everybody by surprise.
It was great. Absolutely. Oh, look who's in the chat. I just spoke to him last week, and we are going to get to your collaboration with Mike Perkins. But he wants to know, and I'll zoom in when we talk about this, he wants to know what the artwork is over your shoulder. And also, what are some of your favorite art pages you own? I'm going to zoom in, Dan.
Yeah, that is a page of Neil Adams art from an issue of Detective, which I just like the way the shot is framed. In the bottom half of the page, we see Batman's legs and then the villains coming in between it. I just find that just a great compositional shot.
Excellent. And any other prized art pages among your collection?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of which have been drawn by Mr. Perkins, no less, from our run on Green Lantern that we did. And including this great splash page he did of the Cyborg Superman when we had him appear in that story. But yeah, I have some other Adam stuff, some Grell stuff, of course, from our association together for years, some other Silver Age stuff. I mean, it's quite a mix. And a lot of it is, styles that are very different from my own because it's fun to look at and say, how do they make this work? Because I don't make things work that way. We all have our own pathways to our own solutions. And it's fascinating to see in the artwork how some of that happens.
That's excellent. Another artist watching, Art Baltazar. Hey, Artie.
Hey, hi, Art.
Good to see you or hear or really see your words. That's excellent. And your fantastic avatar of your self-portrait. And Stephen Commander, first of all, says, we miss you in Tampa. But then he also says, JLA Destiny's Hand is one of my favorite JLA stories ever. Was it planned to return the Atom back to his original full mask? I really like the half mask from your Titans.
So actually, I did not come up with the half mask. The half mask was first done by Gil Kane.
Right, Sword of the Atom, absolutely. Yeah.
And which I like so much that I thought, they ought to put the Atom back in it because it makes him feel a little bit younger, which I thought was cool. So when I was doing the Titans, I wanted to bring back that half mask, at least for a while. And I think in part because it had previously existed, I just thought it was a good look. I always liked it on Kid Flash. That's one of the reasons I gave Booster Gold that same kind of a half mask. You can see kind of the thread through here of my career of things I like that I keep using again and again. So yeah, I mean, that was a fair amount of it that I thought it was a good look for him and just fun to use. But I wasn't the one who came up with it.
That's great. It's funny. I always use Ray Palmer as an example of a great character that I don't know, and certainly even back in the Silver Age, I don't know how long that run was of the Atom solo book, but I always think a character like him is great to show up, like Sword of the Atom, do a great miniseries, and then I always love him in a team book, but it's just it's I don't know if he can, like I said, I don't know if he can sustain an ongoing. But I just think is a fun character to pop in with a great miniseries and then, again, have him be part of teams. Great character, but I just don't know if he can sustain a solo book.
Yeah, I think you might be right that a lot of it is because once you get to the point of having a character whose main power is to become, 6 inches tall, where do you go? And you can make that work for particular storylines. You can make it work for particular situations. Over the long haul, I'm not so sure. It would be fascinating to try it, I suppose, but I don't know that I really want to either. So, but yeah, there's certainly worth to that. And just from a visual standpoint, so one time I had mentioned Dick Giordano earlier, and one time we were talking about doing some kind of an Atom story, and Dick said, what would be good? That instead of inking the figure real small, we should always draw it like 4 times larger than it's going to appear, ink it, and then shrink it down to size and pop it in the book so it would have more detail. And I said, yes, let's do it. But we never got to. So,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it sucks much like, it's one of my favorite jokes in the first Richard Donner Superman movie, where Clark goes to the phone booth and it's only a half booth where it's really just the phone and the frame around the phone. It's not a real booth and everything. But certainly one of the great powers of the Atom that I always loved reading as a little kid was the fact that he would jump into phone lines and travel, on the traditional phone lines. But in today's cellular technology, he's screwed. So you need that kind of almost like Superman scene with the Atom where it's like, oh yeah, damn it, we're on cell phones, so I can't do this anymore.
That's a great idea. Yes.
Well, every now and then we try. But Stephen Commander says, I think I might have mentioned it, Dan, once or twice, that Ray's been my favorite since Roger Stern and Tom Pyre's Power of the Atom. Another great miniseries.
Yes,
absolutely.
It was. Yes.
And yes. And that's interesting. The Atom could make for a great Fantastic Four-S ongoing. Yeah, with Lego Monster, you might be right. That might, that's a good way to do it. Certainly, with Ray being a scientist and everything. And did Jean go nuts? Yeah, Jean went nuts. She bonded with Eclipso, right, Dan?
Right. Yeah. And then obviously, there have been a lot of different looks at it and different varied story ideas we've seen over the time. I think Ray has kind of come and gone out of not gone from continuity, but all of a sudden you realize we've gone 3-4 years and we haven't seen him anywhere. They also introduced a younger, different Atom character.
Ryan Choi, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan Choi. So I'm not even sure where they stand on Ray Palmer right now.
Yeah, he's kind of become, without the unfortunate domestic abuse, he's kind of become like the Hank Pym in a lot of ways, I think, of the DCU. And that, more for his science than actually shrinking down and stuff. But I don't know. Again, growing up, I mean, we all have our favorite characters when we were little kids, and I like Ryan Choi just fine. But I don't know. And also, it was interesting the way they used Ray Palmer in Legends of Tomorrow, the TV show.
Yes,
because he had more of an Iron Man-esque feel than he really did your traditional Atom and everything. So, and I love Razor Ralph.
Yeah, in a way, he was part Iron Man, part Blue Beetle.
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. Steven has a great idea. Ray Palmer in Kandor. That would have worked.
Yeah, he could have been the biggest guy in Kandor at 6 inches tall.
How you doing?
A giant.
Oh my God, he's like Shaq down here. What the hell?
Actually, I can just visualize a Carmine Infantino cover scene out of that where, you've got a bunch of Kandorians standing around. Oh, it's that giant Ray Palmer. Yeah, and there's giant Atom standing in the middle of Kandor City.
You're busting the city, man. I could just see Superman yelling at him through the bottle and everything. Good Lord, that's hilarious.
In the Silver Age, how did no one come up with that? It's a natural.
Oh yeah. It's like a Robert Kanigher sort of cover idea of some of the crazy Silver Age ideas. You're absolutely right. That's hilarious. And also, I would have liked to have seen more. Boy, we're on a great Ray Palmer kick. I would have liked to have seen more Al Pratt Ray Palmer crossovers, because I think Al Pratt's an interesting Golden Age character that they could have done a lot more with him.
Who's just a short guy that they called the Atom. That was it.
Yes. Well, his trainer, I know, taught him how to box and everything.
True.
So
short reach.
Good stuff, man. You're killing me. See, I can't have these conversations. You and Mark were pretty much the only guys that I could have conversations like this with. So that's great. All right, let's get to the Batman First Night. And all we've seen right now is this incredible Mike Perkins teaser image. But I'm excited. He was telling me, Mike was telling me last week, Dan, and I'd forgotten about if you were involved in that 2-part story where it was a multiverse story. And we had like Silver Age Superboy, and we had 1939 Batman in it. Were you one of the writers on that?
Yes. Yeah. And in a way, that's what first probably whet my appetite a little bit for, the original Batman. And at that time, I also ended up drawing some of those sequences with, original Batman. And just this idea of, as I thought about it more and more, this character who existed at a time was so different from Batman as we've come to know him now, because Batman now is, almost Iron Man in that, he indulges in space travel. He fights aliens. He'll fight Darkseid, on down the list. He's got equipment and technology for virtually everything. Whereas in day one, he didn't have any of that. And part of what I was really drawn to is this guy who was very much surviving based on his own skills, his own wits, and nothing else. There was no Batcave. There was no Batmobile per se. And, from the very start, I would describe it as, he doesn't have any of that stuff. It's just him. And not only that, but he's set against this very interesting time in history of 1939, when the Great Depression had been running for 10 years. We have World War II on the cusp of breaking out in Europe, because it's on by the fall of 1939. In the meantime, you have everything else happening in Germany as it was. And so it's just this incredibly interesting time, I think, in history. And I think very interesting in looking at who Bruce Wayne was as he was originally portrayed and how Batman was originally portrayed. And I just thought, gosh, there's so much here that I got more and more intrigued with it and, wanted to play around with it.
Yeah, there's no Alfred. There's, as you say, I mean, I think back to, especially as we are, obviously Mickey Mouse just hit the public domain. We're still a few years from Superman and Batman doing it, but there does lie that potential to explore this period of Batman, what we only see in Detective 27, because that is essentially what eventually will, become public domain. As I remind people all the time, and in fact, I think King and I were talking about it last night, Tarzan's a great example where, as you know, because you worked on the Dynamite Tarzan book, and it's like, no, you can't call the book Tarzan, but you can call it Lord of the Jungle. And you can have, and were you allowed, Dan, to call him Tarzan within the book?
Within the book, yes, but it could not be on the title.
Right.
And there again, it's somewhat the same approach, where I think Tarzan fits, as originally conceived, this very specific time frame in which Edgar Rice Burroughs first dreamed him up. It just fits that realm better. It fits the parameters of what are built around that particular character. And I think, Batman has changed extremely well with the times, and a very easy to adapt character. Not all characters are that adaptable, but still, in those first several stories, there's something about it. There's something visceral about Batman at that point that I just find wonderful. And then, for the purposes of our story with Mike Perkins, Mike has put so much time and effort into trying to portray the world of 1939 with that sense of mood and what were people like and what was society like. And, so for example, if I write a scene where Bruce Wayne is opening a pill bottle, I remember sending Mike some reference, just because even pill bottles looked so different at that time. They were all glass. There were not plastic pill bottles. All that stuff that goes into it is so incredibly time consuming for the artist. But it is for the writer as well. I was telling the guys once, I spend more time working on this than I do anything else, just because the amount of immersion that is required to try and get this right is really tremendous. And then you get paranoid that you're going to blow it somehow, right? So I do everything I can to be accurate, but it's part of that world, and it's part of what is Gotham City at that time, and how has Gotham City been affected by the Depression. Were there 10 cities? Yes. All that kind of thing, which again, I find it fascinating.
And you've certainly drawn Batman many times in the past, but is this your first time writing Batman? I mean,
to this level, yes. Yeah.
As a solo character. Yeah.
To this level, it is. Yes.
That's great, man. That's really exciting. And again, like you say, also, I've always appreciated, and I don't even, and it probably maybe was used back in the 40s when they would refer to the superheroes. But this sounds like it's much more of a mystery man story, to categorize superheroes rather than, the union suit superhero that we became accustomed to once they started fucking with Batman's design and Superman's design as the 40s progressed.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this is, for the purposes of our story, for example, Gordon and Batman have not met. So we don't even know, they don't have a relationship. I think Gordon is intrigued by the reports he's hearing from his officers on staff about this guy. And then it becomes something that the media pick up on. And like so many things, it gets expanded to, is there a giant bat flying over the city of Gotham? Things like that become part of the rumor mill. And
Sure.
and even the media coverage at that time. So, I think there's a lot that can go into it that way. And what we had talked about from the start is the idea that by embracing that which was originally there with Batman, in a way, we're kind of running counterpoint to what Batman is now, which I think that's part of what makes it different. And it was Mike's idea to go to Black Label with it and say, let's make it fit that rather than, something different. And that has also been absolutely the right decision for it. It allows us to tell the story somewhat differently.
Man, I'm telling you, I'm very excited for it. Forgive the crass question, but with the pending trade, public domain situation, this kind of story being made now while Batman is still under copyright and stuff, and this is likely more of a lawyer question than a question for yourself. But I wonder if, in the same way that Disney has incorporated the Steamboat Willie image as part of their trademark. A lot of times, if you'll watch a Walt Disney animated thing, it literally starts with a snippet of Steamboat Willie whistling and stuff. And again, it shows the Walt Disney trademark and everything. And again, much like Tarzan, Disney will still hold the Mickey Mouse trademark. DC will still hold the Batman and Superman trademarks. But I didn't know if, again, a 1939 story like this could make them say when it's up for public domain, well, we did 39 Batman here, back in 2024. I don't know.
As you said, I'm not a lawyer either, and I don't know that. I do know that has never been any part of my discussions with anyone at the office, for example, that this and certainly as Mike and I approached it, was very much just built on, we want to tell this good, interesting, different sort of story. And was 100% of the discussions that came out of this. And I think that's also how it was approved and greenlit. Whereas, if there was anything else to it, I never heard about it. So
fair enough.
We'll see.
Yeah. No, and really, this reminds me of when I believe it was Tom DeHaven did that wonderful It's Superman novel that was set like in 1938. And it very much was a year one, really. I mean, I know other comics have done, year one stories for various heroes and stuff, but it was like, no, this is Daily Star, Clark Kent and Superman and stuff really at the beginning. And that is what is intriguing about your First Night story and everything. And again, I love that it's Black Label. Some comments from the Peanut Gallery. Roberts 100 says, Batman as the urban boogeyman is something that should be told more. Well, and again, it fits. Like, you can almost envision newsreels seeing like a shadowy figure over rooftops and stuff. And could this be the Batman? And certainly the radio reports of the day. I'm sure I'm sure that'll be part of your narrative.
Yeah.
Great stuff like that. And Mike told me, and I found it interesting, that again, to really make it focused as a Bruce Wayne Batman story, we won't see any of the Rogues Gallery.
No. Part of it is because, if we look back and look at Batman this way. So Batman first shows up in Detective Comics 27. Robin shows up in Detective Comics 33. So in between that, I think we have a period of time where it's just Batman alone, and the recognizable villains that way are not really a part of it. It was more, what was it at the time? And we'd see, Hugo Strange and like his giant monsters kind of thing, and it was built more around that. And so to kind of play off that atmosphere, that's what we wanted to do too. I didn't want it to be another Joker story. We wanted to play with the atmosphere that was there. We have a villain that is simply called The Voice, which is this enigmatic person in the background kind of thing. And that, again, it follows sort of the atmosphere and pattern, if you will, that was done with Batman in those earliest days. And again, it's such a visceral Batman that's what I really liked about it. Just really, some people refer to it as Batman with a machine gun. To me, that isn't quite right, but visceral is the right word.
That's great, man. And again, I'm a big fan of the pulps of that era, and it sounds like they very much are an influence in what you're trying to do, the shadow stories and those kind of villains. I mean, at first I was thinking cliffhangers. I'm like, no, that's really more 40s. I mean, it really isn't. Again, I think to the original pulps for the atmosphere that you're going for with this iteration of Batman. So, more comments. Let's see. Caesar of Rome. When did Hugo Strange show up? Within that period that you're discussing, because Batman and the Monster Men, that I know Matt Wagner based his little mini series on, those original detective stories and stuff.
Yeah, and in fact, I think the first person to touch on Hugo Strange again, wasn't that Steve Englehart when he was doing the Batman stuff, like around 75, 6, somewhere in there?
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and that's, again, a great original villain that I'm glad is back and part of the thing. And yeah, Roberts, you're right. Another great story, The Mad Monk, was another great early story that Wagner adapted. Did you go back at all and look at what Matt did with his miniseries, or no?
No, as a matter of fact, I made a point not to. I remember reading it and loving it. I'm a big fan of Matt's work.
Sure.
And I remember it and said, I don't want it to, it had been so, I mean, that came out, what, 20
years ago?
Yeah. So I made a point of not wanting to address it because I didn't want to have to work away from it, nor did I want to be attracted to it. I wanted our thing to be its own. So what I'm going to do is, once we're finally done, I'm going to go back and look at it again.
That's excellent. Well, you'll see him at OAX, so you'll have some good shop talk to discuss and everything.
Yes.
That's cool. How far in the story have you progressed? Are you done with the third issue yet, or?
No, Mike just gave us some pages yesterday. He's about 20 pages into book 3, and it's a 3-issue series. So we're definitely in the final stretch.
Cool. They're oversized issues as well. And I don't even mean, well, certainly from a format standpoint, they're bigger, like the Black Label books, but also a page count. Aren't they longer than 30?
Each one is 48 pages with 46 pages of story and art, and then a couple of contextual pages that go along with it because.
Oh, great.
Well, I felt the need to address the difference between the world of 1939 and what we have today. And so rather than have characters in the book start to explain everything, which gets boring, I wanted to come up with a different way to kind of set the table for what readers were going to see. And I think we have something that's going to be very effective that way. And that way, once we get to the story itself, readers don't have, the characters don't have to explain it for the benefit of the readers. So that, if they refer to Crystal Knot, for example, people will know what that is somewhat based on what we provide in terms of context.
That's great, man. That was so exciting when Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were doing that in Watchmen. And ever since then, I love back matter, if that's the proper classification of what you're describing. But I think that's great. And again, it really, I think, will pull us more into that 1939 world. Talking comics with Gorminator. Sometimes it's an eye chart to read some of these notes, Dan. I'll be honest with you. I can't wait for this. My number one most anticipated comic. Batman in a noir setting is fully and 100% my thing. I want to see much more noir detective. Bring it on.
Well, you've got it coming. And seriously, it was, and I'll go back to what I said before. There are no computers. There's no easy way for Batman around it. So let's assume our version of Batman is on the scene of a crime. He actually has an object where he can get a fingerprint, right? Then what? And seriously, he doesn't have any access to a data file. There's nothing he can do. He has to come up with this idea that, okay, I found a fingerprint. Now, who does it belong to? How do I find out? So that then becomes a problem for him. And I think there again, that's built very much around this idea of, okay, I can solve one problem, but like all of us, so often one solution to a problem presents two more problems, right? So there's a little bit of that happening here.
And I'm really, as you say, Jim Gordon doesn't know the Batman, but he does know Bruce Wayne. And I look forward to, that was, again, something as a kid, seeing those initial scenes of the two of them in the drawing room. Just, hey, isn't this interesting, Bruce? I got this weird criminal case I can't seem to crack.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, really? Tell me more about it, Jim. Right, and it's, again, this kind of coy dance that Bruce is doing with Jim Gordon.
Well, and also the idea that if we look at Gordon's age at that time, we can start to extrapolate certain things. And one of those is that version of Jim Gordon is probably a solid 30 to 40 years older than is Bruce. And so that likely means that Jim Gordon certainly was acquainted with Bruce's parents and other things that go along with that. So I think it builds in some very interesting backstory there. And it also starts to explain a little bit why Jim Gordon would have befriended Bruce Wayne in the first place. Because at that time, Bruce doesn't appear to have a lot of positive attributes. He's walking around, he's smoking his pipe, just appears the idle playboy. So what does the police commissioner have to do with him? And we get into that. That's part of our story.
Roberts 100 wants to know, how prominent will Bruce be from a Gothamite perspective? So, yeah, where is he as far as the Gotham community? And you don't have to, if it's spoilery,
right. And I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it best. I would say he's a mystery, just like Batman is. He represents something of a lost soul. People are aware of his tragic background. But for example, when we first see Wayne Manor, Bruce is living in it all alone. Like I said, there's no butler. There's no one else. It's this big rambling place. It's a total mess because he has no support around him. He's kind of at the point, who of us lived in a nice, well-kept place when we were 22 years old, right? So, and you walk into what looks like this incredible mansion on the outside, but it's fallen apart on the inside. And I think that encompasses a little bit of who this character is at that point.
The tragedy behind him and again, his age. Absolutely. Dan, I'm excited. I feel the same way that Gorminator does. I got to make sure I say his name
Thank
right.
you.
But yeah, and no, truly, man, and actually it was Perkins. I missed the PR article that I'm sure all the nerd websites had. And Perkins is like, hey, me and Jurgens are doing this Batman 39 thing. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to talk about it. Hell yeah. So
and again, I can't emphasize this enough. The work Mike is doing on this is just astounding. And it started with that, which was our kind of our official presentation piece, our pitch piece that went along with it, to say this is the world of the character. This is what the series will feel like, what it'll look like, what it'll be about. And this is what is going to represent the entire series. And what you see is that sort of familiar pose and cape of Batman as he appeared at that time, along with the world of 1939, where, the Tommy guns and the urban criminals of that time, the Prohibition type era and everything else are still very real effects, and especially in Gotham City. And that's very much the atmosphere of the book.
That's terrific, man. Again, I know everyone thinks of New York as Gotham, knowing Chicago's history as well, and especially one of the South Side suburbs, Calumet City, I think very much has that feeling. Max Collins in the Road to Perdition books really goes into detail on Calumet City. And, it's got that kind of open thing. Kansas City was the same way. I'm literally rereading Walter Cronkite's biography that Douglas Brinkley wrote. And he talks about Walter in the 30s in Kansas City. And, that was machine politics, freewheeling town.
And there's also a point in this where one of the other things that draws Gordon and Batman together is if Batman has to go to the commissioner of police, why is that? Well, it's because he can't trust half the guys on the force because they're on the take. That kind of thing, which I think would be very consistent with what is Gotham City, what was Gotham like in 1939. So, and that's where you can start to see, okay, what brings these two together? It's not just, oh, he's commissioner, therefore he's trustable. It's, I think we kind of make it clear Gordon's a decorated veteran from World War I, and therefore would have that kind of trust built up around him.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
And I also look forward to comparing this story to what Tom King and Phil Hester did with Gotham City Year One. I know it was about Bruce's grandparents versus it being a Batman story, and Slam Bradley, obviously the hero of that. But no, I think, again, looking at Gotham at this period, as opposed to the 60s, I suppose, where Year One was set. It's going to be fun to compare. Now, great. Honestly, Dan, I'm so glad you guys are doing this. It starts in March, beginning of March?
Yeah, first week in March. I think it comes out like March 4th or 5th. But it's first week in March.
Excellent. And we remind people again that Dan is part of OAX next weekend in Orlando at the Doubletree, I believe, or right across the street from the Universal theme park.
Yep.
Dan amongst literally dozens of A-list artists. And it's going to be a great art event, more so than a convention, as we discussed earlier in the broadcast. So I'm envious if you're going. I look forward to a full report from attendees and from creators that are part of it. I think it's going to be great.
Definitely.
Dan, as always, man, I appreciate your time. Thank you. I hope I didn't keep you too long. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Not at all. Not at all. And thank you, John. It's always fun. Always a pleasure.
Well, I feel the same way, man. Looking forward to when we're face-to-face sharing a limo to the next convention.
There you go. That'll be fun.
You bet, man. Everybody, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Tonight, I'm talking to Steve Orlando. And I absolutely will, man. No, I know it's mutual admiration on both sides of that, those two guys. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Steve. We'll be talking at 8 o'clock Eastern time, just a few hours from now. Join us. Until then, thank you. Stay safe. Stay happy, stay healthy.